it going? No. Yeah, the timer's going. This is so you can have some kind of idea. Kind of, sort of. I don't think the library knew what they were getting themselves into. But, wish you were here. Love ya.
This is the end of the series. I thought it would be fun today in writing. You know, he's a writer. Well, the truth is that when I was very, very young, younger than some of you are right now, my mom was trying to teach me how to read. I hated it. In fact, I remember, I actually went up to her and I said, I hate to read. I'm never going to use it the rest of my life.
I got that part right on.
Yeah, you can see how that turned out. And fortunately for me, my mom didn't listen to me, and she kept teaching me. And then one day she took me to the public library where we were living, which was up in Alaska at the time. Yeah. Anchorage, Alaska, where the mosquitoes are the size of your fist, and they chase you in giant black swarms, and if they catch you, they leave nothing behind but a desiccated corpse. Nice place, though. So we were in the public library there, and as I was wandering around in the children's section, I found this series of very thin children's detective novels. Now, I didn't really know what they were about, but they had bright covers and interesting titles, so I pulled one off the shelf and I checked it out. And it was the very first book I'd ever checked out on my own. And when I started reading it, for whatever reason, it was as if a switch just got flipped inside of my head. And instead of seeing the word for sunset, for example, I could actually see a sunset in my head. I could hear what the characters were saying. I could smell the locations, and it was as if I was in the story. And unfortunately, it's been so long that I don't actually remember what the book was called. But I do remember that it involved tomato sauce being mistaken for blood, which seemed terribly exciting to me when I was 5 years old. But I really think that the ability of writing to transport us to other places and into the minds of other people really is the closest thing to true magic that we have in the world today. You know, you can be sitting at home in a chair or standing or on the floor or wherever the case may be, and with a good book, at the same time you could be flying around the moon in a spaceship or riding a wild moose or petting a singing toaster. Anything is possible. And that's really why of the very first chapter of the inheritance cycle. Wind howled through the night, carrying a scent that would change the world. Alrighty then, who's got it? Okay, so one of the things that I enjoyed most about writing this series was creating the various languages for it. And I created a number of them, but the two main ones are the elf language, the ancient language, and the dwarf language. And I'm going to read you a blessing, an elvish blessing in the ancient language, just to give you, sorry, jet lag, brain's going into freeze. What I meant to say is that I based the ancient language partly on Old Norse, which I thought gave it a good sound and feel. And what I'm going to do here is read you a blessing in the ancient language, but I have to apologize because I have an absolutely horrendous Elvish accent. Mainly because in the ancient language you're supposed to roll your R's on the tip of your tongue like you would in Spanish or Italian, and I can't do that. The only way I can roll my R's, and I know this sounds horribly obscene, but the only way I can roll my R's is by wiggling my uvula. So, I'm going to wiggle my uvula at you guys, and I hope you like it too. Atra sterni onothelduen, ar lifa unicarta onner, undu everinia onovarda. Now, that said, my favorite language is definitely the dwarf language, because that I created from scratch, and it has a wonderfully meaty sound to it. You can just sink your teeth into it. And unlike the ancient language, unlike Elvish, I actually have an excellent Dwarvish accent. Mainly because in Dwarvish you are supposed to roll your R's by wiggling your uvula. So, let the wiggling commence. Barm Rethkarach, Barm Jürgen Karmeter, Noseto Goroth Bastarnog, Durin Sesti Rakkithen, Yok Iswarv Aj Barzulagur, Dur Dorgrimst Aj Welden Rak Anowen, Mog Tor Rak Jürgen Vran. As you might expect, dwarves are usually very hoarse, and no one much likes hearing their love poems. All right. Now, as some of you might notice, Book 3, Brissinger, is a rather large book. And like most large books, it has quite a few sentences in it. And I'm actually very fond of many of these sentences. One in particular involves a bumbleating bumblebee, which I probably should have cut in editing, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. But in all of these sentences, there's one that's my absolute favorite. And I want to read it to you guys. I just think it's particularly well written, and I think that it just has a lot of literary merit. So, you want to hear my absolute favorite sentence from Brissinger? Yeah? Die, puny human! I mean, because really, what's the point of writing fantasy if you can't write lines like, die, puny human, every now and then? All right, and Book 4. Now, I should say, for those of you who have not read Book 4, or 3, or 2, I am not going to read any spoilers for you. Oh, come on, you can read the spoilers yourself. What I am going to read for you is a slightly longer excerpt, which is the very end of the very first chapter of the very last book of the Inheritance Cycle. And so I hope you guys enjoy this. The sound was stabbing, slicing, shivering, like metal scraping against stone. Aragon's teeth vibrated in sympathy, and he covered his ears with his hands, grimacing as he twisted around, trying to locate the source of the noise. Saphira tossed her head, and even through the din, he heard her whine in distress. Aragon swept his gaze over the courtyard 2 separate times before he noticed a faint puff of dust rising up the wall of the keep from a foot-wide crack that had appeared beneath the blackened, partially destroyed window where Bloodgarm had killed the magician. As the squeal increased in intensity, Aragon risked lifting one of his hands off his ears to point at the crack. "Look!" he shouted to Arya, who nodded in acknowledgement. He replaced his hand over his ear. Without warning or preamble, the sound stopped. Aragon waited for a moment, then slowly lowered his hands, for once wishing that his hearing was not quite so sensitive. Just as he did, the crack jerked open wider, spreading until it was several feet across, and raced down the wall of the keep. Like a bolt of lightning, it struck and shattered the keystone above the doors to the building, showering the floor below with pebbles. The whole castle groaned, and from the damaged window to the broken keystone, the front of the keep began to lean outward. "Run!" Aragon shouted at the Varden, though the men were already scattering to either side of the courtyard, desperate to get out from under the precarious wall. Aragon took a single step forward, every muscle in his body tense, as he searched for a glimpse of Roran somewhere in the throng of warriors. At last, Aragon spotted him, trapped behind the last group of men by the doorway, bellowing madly at them, his words lost in the commotion. Then the wall shifted and dropped several inches, leaning even further away from the rest of the building, pelting Roran with rocks, knocking him off balance, and forcing him to stumble backward under the overhang of the doorway. As Roran straightened from a crouch, his eyes met Aragon's, and in his gaze, Aragon saw a flash of fear and helplessness, quickly followed by resignation, as if Roran knew that no matter how fast he ran, he could not possibly reach safety in time. A wry smile touched Roran's lips, and the wall fell. Does he live? Does he die? Read chapter 2. Now, I would love to try to... Hello? There we go. I would love to try to answer some of your questions here. Before I do, I would just ask you to keep in mind that if you have read book 4, there are plenty of people here who have not, so let's try to avoid spoiling it for them, and we won't tell them who lives or who dies. We'll leave that for the online comments. Alrighty then. Yes?